Video games are full of epic stories and memorable characters, but some characters you end up remembering for all the wrong reasons. From unfortunate imagery to cringe-inducing writing and voice acting, here are some of the most offensive video game characters of all time. Oil Man from Mega Man, powered up. When Capcom decided to remake the original Mega Man game in 2006, they made a few changes. The graphics were updated, and since the original Mega Man was the only game in the franchise to feature 6 robot masters instead of the usual 8, they added 2 new characters to the mix. One of them was Oil Man, an interesting idea that was saddled with a design that made him look like he was straight out of a 19th century minstrel show. The design was so bad, in fact, that he was left off the box art for the American version, as though surprising players with an accidental racist caricature would go better. His dialogue isn't much better either.
Hey, what's up, old man? I know you totally dig your work and all, but how's about chilling out and listening to what I gotta say?
The good news is that this is one of the few stereotypes in gaming that has a relatively happy ending. When Oil Man appeared in the Mega Man comics, artist Chad Thomas gave him a redesign that added a super heroic scarf. It's the definition of making the best of a bad situation, but at least it's something. Wang from Shadow Warrior. Ever wonder what Duke Nukem 3D would be like if it tossed out the casual misogyny and was just straight up racist? Well, even if you didn't, we're sorry to report that 3D Realms decided to answer that question anyway with 1997's Shadow Warrior. Our hero this time is Wang, and yes, his name is exactly the joke you think it is. He's voiced by actor John William Galt, who delivers the game's one-liners in such a monumentally offensive fashion that you'd think his enemies were as vulnerable to racism as they are to bullets.
Just like Nagasaki.
Surprisingly, Shadow Warrior was rebooted in 2013, this time voiced by Jason Liebrecht. And while the 21st century version of Wang started off a whole lot better than his 1997 counterpart, his second outing wasn't so lucky. Polygon referred to even the new Wang as a walking Asian stereotype in an outdated, unfunny game full of horrible dialogue and racist stereotyping. Harsh, but fair.
Not to sound like a racist, but all you demons really do look alike.
Erica Anderson from Catherine. With a focus on complicated relationships and sexuality, it was almost inevitable that Catherine would make a few mistakes along the way. With Erica, however, the problem actually isn't in the character herself, it's how everyone else reacts to her. Erica is a trans woman in her 30s, and throughout the game she's presented as kind, smart, desirable, and extremely well-liked by everyone except the other main characters. At multiple points, the protagonist and his pals make casually transphobic comments about her without ever getting any real consequences for it, and Erica is meant to be one of his oldest friends. It's not just limited to interactions within the game either. Even the credits and official art book refer to her by the wrong name. Needless to say, Erica's portrayal has remained controversial in the years since Catherine's release. Letitia from Deus Ex Human Revolution. Deus Ex Human Revolution was almost universally acclaimed, racking up a 90% score on Metacritic. That said, one aspect of the game left most reviewers and players scratching their heads: an informant named Letitia, whose dialogue comes right out of a 70s cop show.
If it ain't the captain himself, Mr. Seraph done fixed you up good, ain't he?
No less than Time magazine called her the worst thing in the game, and it's easy to see why. In an otherwise well-crafted cyberpunk future, her ridiculous over-the-top dialogue seems incredibly out of place. It's obvious that Letitia is meant to be a throwback character, but it's just as obvious that a game made in 2011 should have probably moved past stereotypes that were seen in media from 40 years ago. Instead, she's gone down in gaming history as what Kotaku called that weirdly racist NPC.
Things ain't looking good, Captain.
Kung Pao from Clay Fighter 63 1/3. Shadow Warrior might have set the standard, but Clay Fighter 63 1/3 did its level best to take Asian stereotypes to a whole new level of cringeworthiness. Kung Pao was, as you might expect from the name, a kung fu enthusiast and Chinese chef who shouts the names of foods like egg foo young and chop suey while fighting his enemies.
Egg foo young! Tupu plata!
The only thing that makes it worse is that it's not just astonishingly racist, it's also a criminal waste of voice acting talent. Playfighter boasted a cast that included Frank Welker, Dan Castellaneta, and Jim Cummings, among others. Kung Pao himself was voiced by Jess Harnell, who's probably best known for the role of Wacko Warner on Animaniacs, and who probably ought to leave this one off his resume. Ash from Bare Knuckle 3. If you were playing Streets of Rage 3 in America, you probably had no idea that you actually missed out on fighting one of the game's bosses. Check out the Japanese version though, and you'll probably agree that Sega made the right call when they ditched Ash, one of the most infamous characters of the 16-bit era. To say Ash is an offensive stereotype is honestly doing a disservice to offensive stereotypes that at least make some attempt at subtlety. When he shows up as the boss of a stage that takes place on the docks, he's dressed like a stereotypical nightmare. Throw in the running and the jumps, and it's beyond ridiculously offensive. Clearly, there's a good reason why Ash never made it out of Japan. He wasn't even replaced. In other regions, Streets of Rage 3's first level doesn't have a boss at all, and Ash's boat, minus Ash, just sails off after dropping a few regular enemies for you to trounce on your way to victory. Almost every other boxer in Punch-Out! Fighting games in general tend to rely pretty heavily on stereotypes, but no major franchise has ever leaned quite as hard into ethnic shorthand as Nintendo's Punch-Out! With a few exceptions, the entire cast is drawn from a roster of ridiculously overblown caricatures. A Russian character was toned down for the NES, but in the arcade, he was originally known as Vodka Drunkenski. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Italy brought us a boxer named Pizza Pasta. India's Great Tiger draped his namesake animal's skin over his corner post. And they even threw in a hairy hillbilly called Bear Hugger for good measure. Even once the franchise moved to the 90s, Nintendo introduced an Irish fighter whose special attack was called the Irish Jig, and a Jamaican boxer named Bob Charlie, whose special attack is literally referred to in-game as the Shuck and Jive. Little Mac just can't get away from these guys.
That's racist!
Thanks for watching. Click the grunge icon to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus, check out all this cool stuff we know you'll love too.